So continuing with our discussion about temperature regulation, having looked at the two different categories under temperature regulation in the last video, we had endothermy and then we had ectothermy, where we look at the endotherms being able to regulate their body temperature irrespective of the surrounding environment, and then the ectotherms whose body temperature varies with that of the external environment. We looked at the different responses of the endotherms varying environmental temperatures, that is to cold environments, and then to hot environments. And we said for these organisms to have metabolic reactions working effectively, they need to balance the heat that is generated and the heat that is lost from these organisms. So there must be a balance, and the how or the way they can bring about this balance is through what we call thermoregulation. So continuing with thermoregulation, looking at the effect of the environmental temperature on the metabolic rate of a human. Look at this graph, the right-hand side, which shows the effect of environmental temperature on the metabolic rate of a human. Under normal circumstances, we are looking at the metabolic rate down, and then it has the limits. It has the upper critical temperature, it has the lower critical temperature, then upper lethal and lower lethal temperature at different temperatures in degrees Celsius. Now, what expressed at the lower critical temperature? This is the lower or the low environmental temperature at which physical mechanisms like vasoconstriction, election of the hair fail to maintain body temperature constant, triggering a rise in metabolic rate to generate heat to maintain body temperature constant. When you look at the efficiency range, the efficiency range is that range where the body is trying. We are having a decrease in temperature, okay? The environmental temperature is decreasing, let's say from the upper critical temperature as it is coming to the lower critical temperature. And as it is decreasing, that is when we are having the physical mechanisms. They are trying to make sure the body temperature stays into the norm. It stays within the limits, not fluctuating with respect to the environmental temperature. Those are the physical mechanisms, such as vasoconstriction and election of the hair, so that they can trap some heat, and then this guy keeps warm. But look, a point reaches when these guys cannot maintain the body temperature beyond that. So once they don't, they trigger, or there is triggering or stimulation of a rise in metabolic rate, which will generate heat to maintain body temperature. Now, beyond the lower critical temperature, you are looking at the lower Lethal temperature. And this lower Lethal temperature, we say, is the extremely low environmental temperature at which the increased metabolic rate fails to generate enough heat to maintain body temperature constant, which will result into death of the organism. Now, what happens is, once the physical mechanisms have failed, then the body resorts to physiological. And in this case, the basic physiological mechanism that we are having, is increased metabolism. Once you have an increased metabolism in the body, then you have heat being generated. And as you are generating heat, then you are increasing the body temperature. So now, when the environmental temperature continues to decrease, a point reaches when also the increased metabolism fails to generate enough heat that can maintain the body temperature constant, resulting into death of such an organism. That is the lower Lethal temperature. There is a note which says hypothermia is a condition that results when heat loss generated exceeds heat gain from metabolism due to prolonged exposure to coldness, resulting in too great reduction in core body temperature of the organism. That is hypothermia. When you have a lot of heat loss exceeding the heat gain. We said we need to have a balance between heat loss and heat gain. But look, if you have heat loss greatly increased and it exceeds the heat gain from metabolism, then there is a reduction in the core body temperature of an organism. Now, what does it mean? Humans or endotherms, we work in an efficient temperature range. That is the efficiency range. Still, you can survive when there is increased metabolism below the efficiency range, that is lower or below the low critical temperature. But a point reaches when there is a great reduction in core body temperature of an organism, and this organism cannot survive. So it results into death. Now, when you look at our graph, we have what we call the high or the upper critical temperature. Now, the upper critical temperature is when temperature is increasing. Now, as temperature is increasing, that is the high environmental temperature, we also have physical mechanisms that try to reduce or that try to maintain the body temperature at a lower level. That is, you will have physical mechanisms like sweating. You will have physical mechanisms like vasodilation. That is, the blood vessels dilate, they increase in size, they transport a lot of blood to the skin. Increased sweating, you know, through sweat, you are losing water to the atmosphere. Now, as you are losing water, putting it to mind that water has a high latent heat of vaporization, that means loss of water goes with a lot of heat. So as you are losing water through sweating, then you are losing a lot of heat from the body. So that way, you try to lower the body temperature. But look, it fails at a high critical temperature when it is very hot and temperatures are increasing beyond the norm. So when that takes place, there is continuous or the increased temperature triggers a rise in metabolic rate, and the body temperature, as the environmental temperature rises, it also continues to rise. Now, we have the upper Lethal temperature. This is an extremely high environmental temperature at which increased metabolic rate generates excessive heat, which denatures enzymes and other structures, resulting into death of an organism. Now, what takes place as the environmental temperature is increasing? We have mechanisms of homeostasis. We have the negative feedback mechanism and the positive feedback mechanism. Now, this is a positive feedback mechanism where there is continuous stimulation of something. A rise in temperature brings about continuous stimulation or triggering the rise in metabolic rate continuously. Now, once there is continuous triggering of the metabolic rate, as well as you know that when you have a rise in metabolism, then it is increasing the heat that is being generated alongside. So what happens? You will have the body temperature also increasing or rising beyond what it was. That is what happens at the upper resort temperature. And once this takes place, you expect the enzyme catalyzed reactions to stop because there has been the denaturing of enzymes. These guys don't work at high temperatures. We shall have other structures getting destroyed because most of the structures are protein in nature. Most of these structures are protein in nature, so you expect them to be affected by high temperatures. As a result, you will have death of an organism. The efficiency range, that is the range of thermoneutrality, the external temperature range at which the body physiological mechanisms, at which the body's physical mechanisms are capable of maintaining temperature constant. And in man, it is 27 to 31 degrees Celsius. But it varies according to the environmental temperature in which the animal inhabits. That is where the animal lives. This is because sometimes the animals have the ability to acclimatize. That is, if the environmental temperature is high, acclimatization takes place by raising the upper critical temperature. And if it is low, then acclimatization takes place by lowering the lower critical temperature. So we have two mechanisms present. That is the positive feedback mechanism and the negative feedback mechanism as you go beyond the low critical temperatures. So that is what happens. You can have the efficiency range changing depending on the environment or depending on the temperature where that organism is. And perhaps what takes place is what we call acclimatization. You become accustomed to a new climate. You become accustomed to a new condition. Okay. So that is the efficiency range, where we have the physical mechanisms able to regulate the body temperature with the external temperature. Now, when you look at this graph, you will ask yourself, why does this organism have to die beyond the lower lido and beyond the upper lido temperature? These are endotherms. And endotherms, we try to regulate our body temperature, and still we have metabolism taking place because we have a lot of functioning body organs in our body. Now, a condition comes where we have the ectotherms. When such circumstances take place in an ectotherm, these guys, they carry out what we call hibernation. For them, they don't die, but once the environmental temperature continues to become low, beyond what they can manage, then these guys carry out what we call hibernation. They lay dormant, there is no metabolism that is taking place, and they wait for favorable conditions to come again. That's when they will resume the normal body functioning. So for them, they don't die. They just become dormant for some time, and then they are able to come back when the right conditions appear. When you check in Michael Roberts, page 311, and the Roberts MBV, that is functional approach, you will find out, or you will find this graph. This graph shows the temperatures at which these organisms are able to survive, the different organisms. You are looking at the air temperature, and then you are looking at the lowest temperature on the earth, air temperature, then human body temperature. Now, you look at also the basal metabolic rate, then you are also looking at the standardized metabolic rate. So you have the low critical temperature for animals living in cold places, much lower than those ones, or much lower than that for those ones that live in warm environments. That is the lower critical temperature at which their physical mechanisms are able to maintain them, or are able to maintain their body temperatures. When you look at the graph, e.g., we look at the desert kangaroo rat has a lower critical temperature just below 30 degrees Celsius, whereas the Arctic fox is about negative 40 degrees Celsius. So you look at a desert rat, which lives in the desert, its lower lethal temperature, its lower critical temperature is high, 30 degrees Celsius. So now, pick this kangaroo rat and bring it to the cold environments where the temperatures are around 24. This guy will not be able to survive. So those are the lowest critical temperatures at which these organisms are able to survive and stay living. Beyond that, then you will expect them to face a challenge. So the lower lethal temperature is much lower for cold dwellers than for warm dwellers. And below the critical temperature, you will expect the metabolic rate of warm dwellers to rise more sharply than that in cold dwellers. Because these cold dwellers, they are the ones, most of them are ectothermic. When you look at the fish, when you look at the reptiles, you expect them to move and carry out hibernation. So their metabolic rate is much lower than that one in the warm dwellers, most of the warm-blooded organisms, which we shall call the endotherms. The metabolic rate starts to rise at a much lower critical temperature for cold dwellers than that for warm dwellers. That is, now you look at the lower critical temperature, and we said it is that temperature where the physical mechanisms fail, and this guy resorts to what we call the metabolic reactions that would bring about a rise in temperature. So the metabolic rate starts to rise at a much lower critical temperature for cold dwellers than that for warm dwellers. Adaptations to extreme climates. We have adaptations to life at low temperatures and adaptations to life at high temperatures. When you look at the adaptations to life at low temperatures, we have the structural adaptations. For example, these guys possess thick fur or hair for trapping a layer of air that is warmed and remains insulating the body against heat loss. They also possess thick layer of subcutaneous fat for insulation against heat loss, as well as development of larger body size than their counterparts in warmer climates to reduce surface area to volume ratio in order to reduce heat loss. And that one is Bergmann's law, development of larger body size than their counterparts in warm climates to reduce surface area to volume ratio. As you increase the size, you are reducing the surface area to volume ratio to heat loss. Then we also have a reduction of the body extremities, such as the earlobes. They are reduced, which will reduce the surface area for heat loss. And this is Allen's law, possessing extremities that are of reduced size than the related species in warmer climates, which will reduce the surface area for heat loss. Other adaptations, we have the development of the countercurrent heat exchange systems in the limbs to enable heat conservation. Now, how does this guy work? It works in that there is an effective heat transfer at all levels to the periphery of the limb by conduction from the incoming warmer arterial blood to the outgoing colder venous blood. When we looked at countercurrent exchange within the loops of Henle, we looked at the ascending and the descending. This one is more permeable to water and the other one is more permeable to salts. So as this one is descending, water is leaving, and then salt concentration is increasing. So likewise, the countercurrent heat exchange system within the limbs is, as more blood is entering, incoming warmer arterial blood, okay? And then there is the outgoing colder venous blood. So there is an effective heat transfer at all levels, which will bring about heat conservation. Then when it comes to the small-sized animals, such as the bats, the dormice, hamsters, hedgehogs, and rodents like the mice, they carry out what we call hibernation, which we call a seasonal response by animals to cold temperatures, during which they become dormant. The body temperature and metabolic rate fall to minimum, or they fall to a minimum that is required for maintaining the vital activities of the body. That is, of course, they are not dead, but they are not high. So they become dormant and these guys fall. The body temperature and metabolic rate fall to the minimum that is just required for maintaining the vital activities of the body, the ones that are essential for it to stay alive. Then the animals said to be, or they are said to be in deep sleep, ebrium, which reduces the energy it needs to survive the winter when food is scarce. That is hibernation. Then sometimes these guys have what we call brown fat, is conserved and is used up rapidly at the end of hibernation to quickly raise the metabolic rate. That is, they are carrying out metabolism of fat where there is a lot of heat that is generated alongside that could be able to raise the body temperature as these guys are ending their hibernation cycle. Some of them migrate to warmer places, such as the swallows, those are the birds, or you can have the migratory organisms. For them, they are able to migrate to the different environments when the environmental temperature fails to favor their survival. Now, we have adaptations to high hot life at high temperatures. When it comes to high temperatures, then we have to develop smaller body size than our counterparts in the colder climates to increase surface area to volume ratio in order to increase heat loss. That is what happens. These guys, the small organisms, they always have a large surface area to volume ratio, hence they will be able to lose a lot of heat. And that is why we say that small mammals or small individuals tend to consume a lot. Their extremities, like the earlobes, are large, thin, with rich blood supply to enable heat loss more easily, such as the elephant's ears. They also have tissues that are tolerant to large temperature fluctuations between day and night, e.g. the camel. They have tissues that can be able to tolerate the extreme high, large temperature fluctuations between day and night. We have bodies being thinly insulated with fat to increase heat loss. That is, the fat deposition reduces. Once the fat deposition reduces, then these guys are able to tolerate large temperature fluctuations between during the day and the night. Other adaptations beyond that, they are able to carry out estivation. That is the seasonal response by animals to drought or excessive heat, during which they become dormant and the metabolic rate together with body temperature reduced to the minimum required for maintaining the vital activities of the body. Organisms that normally carry out estivation, we have the African lungfish, which burrows into mud till the dry season ends. The earthworms and the garden snails also carry out estivation. Now, this one is the response to high temperatures or during the drought. They estivate during high temperatures and they hibernate during cold temperatures. Those are the adaptations to life at the different conditions.